Got late. This is chapter 33. Thank you for the subs. SBP and beyond. There were several significant developments that took place over the late fall of 2006 and early winter of 2007. One of them was a tip I had received from a reporter who called me from time to time. He had shared some fairly interesting things with me during my course of the case, and he was now informing me that the FBI was considering taking over the investigation. It was reported that there might have been a federal angle to some sort, and that would permit their entry into the case, and they were determined to prevent a repeat of the car disaster. Call me a doubting Thomas, but this didn't really seem very likely to me. I couldn't fathom any law enforcement agency wanting to step in and take responsibility for this homicide investigation. Nevertheless, he insisted on giving me the name and telephone number of an agent in the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit, the BAU, located in Quantico, Virginia, and urged me to call. There would be many occasions over that winter when I would ask myself what the hell I was doing. I had left the DA's office nearly 8 months previous and was still somehow involved with this damn case. I had already gone out on a limb when I had written Mary Lacey at the end of October 2006 and asked her to permit me the opportunity to present my theory to a set of outside prosecutors. I had requested the members of the BAU participate as well, so it didn't seem to be out of line to call this agent and chat with him. In for a penny, in for a pound, I figured. I ended up speaking with the FBI Supervisory Special Agent James Fitzgerald. I identified myself and work history to the agent, and I made it clear that I no longer had any investigative authority or responsibility in the matter, and that I was calling as a private citizen who had once played a lead role in the case. It didn't take long to confirm my suspicions. The FBI had no interest in taking over the JonBenét Ramsey murder investigation from Colorado authorities. We started talking about current events in my attempt to get the DA's office to pursue what I considered to be a handful of viable leads. He soon had me fleshing out the details of my discoveries, and then he dropped the other shoe. SSA Fitzgerald informed me, along with being a criminal profiler, his particular area of expertise in the BAU was forensic linguistics, and that he had testified as an expert witness in the state and federal courts on a number of occasions. One of the investigations he had participated in was the Ted Kaczynski Unabomb case. Though he was aware of Professor Foster's work on the Ramsey's ransom note and had reviewed the written opinion of the professor's findings, he had not been provided the opportunity to personally evaluate the note and writings exemplars collected from any of the suspects in the matter. We spoke about the elements of crime scene staging and references in the notes to the lines of dialogue that were headliner movies before or at the time of JonBenét's murder. Like agents Gregory McCary, John Douglas, he felt that the use of the movie script dialogue suggested an amateurish attempt to misdirect the course of the investigation. This was not how kidnappers operated in the real world. SSA Fitzgerald agent expressed his personal views about the content of the ransom demand, but the extensive analysis required an issue of a professional opinion on the possible identity of the author of the note had not yet taken place. During several discussions with the agent, he expressed disappointment over the outcome of Professor Foster's involvement in the investigation. Foster had developed a reputation as a literary detective and made some interesting discoveries during his academic research. But the professor had not been trained in law enforcement, and the letter he sent to Patsy Ramsey before being asked to officially become involved in the investigation had potentially jeopardized his objective standing in the matter. SSA Fitzgerald was not aware of the earlier letter to Patsy Ramsey until notified by the Boulder Police Department after Foster's report was received by them. Professor Foster apparently didn't recognize the need to disclose this previous correspondence, and the agent felt that this probably should have precluded his involvement in the analysis of the writing samples gathered in the case. SSA Fitzgerald was very interested in my theory and wanted to know if I'd be willing to come to Quantico to share it with the members of his team. The opportunity sounded very attractive, but at that juncture, I was not comfortable in taking that step. My allegiance was still to the Boulders DA's office, and I wanted to give them every opportunity to be the ones who would break the case wide open. I would have several more conversations with the BAU supervisory staff over the course of that fall, and we talked about the manner in which their participation in the case might be accomplished. An official request needed to come from the law enforcement agency of primary jurisdiction, and it had to originate with the FBI Denver's field office. Only then could Quantico office participate in the investigation. I kept Mark Beckners informed about my progress or lack of progress that winter, and could never convince him to invite the BAU in for another consultation on the case. He had turned over the primary investigative authority for this case to the DA's office in 2002, and he seemed to be only mildly amused at my efforts to budge Mary Lacey from her fortified position on the Ramsey case. One could only imagine my level of frustration. Author's note, I spoke again with SSA Fitzgerald in March 2012. He had since retired from the FBI and indicated that he had written to Chief Beckner in early 2009, not long after Boulders Police had taken back the case from the DA's office. He was offered to put together a small team of forensic linguistic experts from around the nation and to take another objective look at the ransom note. One of his peers from the United Kingdom had volunteered to participate as well, and it posed to Chief Beckner that the analysis work would be performed pro bono. Chief Beckner reportedly thanked the agent, but for unknown reasons turned down the offer. Fitzgerald continued to practice as a forensic linguistics and went to work for the Academy Group Incorporated, located in Manassas, Virginia, following his retirement from the FBI. He has been involved in a number of high-profile cases since leaving the BAU that have involved a field of threat assessment and textual analysis. There have been many intervening cases over the years that have validated the foundation for this type of criminal investigative work, and notwithstanding Chief Beckner's decision to decline Fitzgerald's earlier offer, I think it would be interesting to see what a new panel of experts would determine as far as authorial attribution of the ransom note. The second important event to occur that winter involved additional discoveries that were related to the behavioral symptoms of a childhood disorder. While working on the written case outlined with and completed in October 2006, I became aware of a childhood behavioral disorder that revolved around the issue of sexually aggressive children. I learned about clinical research that had been conducted on the topic of children with behavioral disorder, commonly referred to as sexual behavioral problems, or SBP. I had obtained a copy of the book, Sexually Aggressive Children, Coming to Terms with Them, and other research materials on that topic that fall, and began to review them in my spare time. Raji's book in particular provided a comprehensive overview of national research that had studied sexual abuse perpetrated by children 12 years of age and younger. Approximately 2 months had passed since the mailing of my letter to the DA's office, and I had finished my study of the SBP textbook. It was incredibly enlightening, and the case studies only served to strengthen my belief that developed from the analysis of the case that indicated some form of family cover-up. This information is not all-inclusive, but provides an overview of behavioral symptoms seen with this childhood disorder. Research into sexually aggressive children was described as being in its infancy in the mid-1990s. It appears that the earliest studies on this topic only dated to 1980. The average onset of pre-adolescent sexual behavioral problems, SBP, are between the ages of 6 and 9. Although the term sexual is used, the child's intentions and motivations for these behavior may be unrelated to sexual gratification. Children act out for many varied reasons. Some may have been prior victims to sexual abuse. Some may act out due to other behavioral problems related to PTSD, anger, fear, and emotional detachment. Sexual acting out has been linked to anger, rage, loneliness, and fear. FBI UCR reports in 1979 revealed that 249 rape arrests for children less than 12 years of age. 66 of those children were under the age of 10. Early research conducted in the 1980s provided evidence that pre-adolescent children behaviors can be aggressive and violent as those of adolescents and adults. FBI UCR discontinued reporting the age of offenders in 1980, but the National Center for Juvenile Justice reported a forcible rape rate of 0.02 per 1,000 and 10 and 11-year-olds in 1988. In 1990, FBI and media reports in this time period indicate that among adults convicted of sex crimes, approximately 30% said that they had began offending before they were 9 years old. A 1991 study revealed that some children engaged in behaviors that involved fire setting, bedwetting, animal mutilation, and scatological behaviors, distributed bodily functions related to urination and elimination. A 1993 nationwide survey of SBP therapists identified pre-adolescent behaviors in 222 children that range from voyeurism to coercion. The more serious offenses involved digital penetration, penile intercourse and anal intercourse, bestiality, and ritualistic and sadistic sexual abuse. Another 1993 survey conducted in the Northwest revealed that some offenders used physical coercion that included tying up their victims. Offenders lack compassion, empathy, and exhibit inadequate social skills. A victim may be the object of revenge or anger and could be viewed as the parent's favored child by the perpetrator. Families frequently attempt to portray themselves to the world as a perfect family. Comorbidity. The SBP patients have a higher incidences of psychiatric disorders that include but are not limited to attachment disorder and separation anxiety. Revelation of these clinical studies and the emerging national recognition of this childhood behavioral disorder was in its infancy at the time of JonBenét's death, but confirmed with what I had occasionally witnessed in the district attorney's weekly SART meetings. Children of Burke Ramsey's age have been proven capable of sexually abusing their siblings and others. Moreover, these studies confirm that children of his age were capable of committing horrendous acts of physical violence typically thought to have been reserved to adults. It has been stated repeatedly that there had been no prior recorded incidents of abuse that would have suggested parental involvement in JonBenét's death. As I pointed out in the case analysis report and PowerPoint outline completed in the fall of 2006, Burke Ramsey had already exhibited one prior incident of violence against JonBenet. The incident involved a blow to the head with a golf club that took place in Michigan and was claimed to be an accident by the Ramsey family. But it was interesting to note that this incident took place within a day or two of JonBenét's birthday in August 1994. One can only wonder whether sibling jealousy or envy may have played any part in this instance and whether these feelings spilled over into the events of the Christmas holidays in 1996. I had also found it interesting that the Paws had reportedly purchased several books on childhood behavior for the Ramsey family. The title of these books were intriguing. Hurried Child, Growing Up Too Fast by David Elkind. Children at Risk by Dobitson/Brower. Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong, Kilpatrick. When exploring the nature of the content of these books, I wondered what might have been taking place in the home that prompted the grandparents to purchase these types of childhood behavioral books for the family. I had reviewed the investigator's report that documented a 1997 interview with former Ramsey nanny, housekeeper Geraldine Vodicka, who stated that Burke Ramsey had smeared feces on the wall of a bathroom during his mother's first bout with cancer. She told investigators that Nedra Pugh, who had been visiting the Ramsey home at the time, had directed her to clean up the mess. There were other police reports in the files that documented what I thought could be viewed as related behavior. CSIs had written about finding a pair of pajama bottoms in JonBenét's bedroom that contained fecal matter. They were too big for her and were thought to belong to Burke Ramsey. Additionally, a box of candy located in her bedroom had also been observed to be smeared with feces. Both of these discoveries had been made during the process of the crime scene during the execution of search warrants following the discovery of JonBenét's body. I wondered whether the fecal matter observed in pajamas thought to have been belonging to Burke and smeared on the box of candy in his sister's bedroom could have been related to symptoms of scatological behavior associated with SBP. I also contemplated the reasons why a box of JonBenét's candy would have been smeared with human excrement. As previously noted, Linda Hoffman Pugh had also mentioned finding fecal matter in JonBenét's bed sheets. It raised the question as to who may have been responsible for the deposit of the material in her bed. Had it been JonBenet or was it Burke Ramsey? I readily admit that I am not a trained psychologist, a psychiatrist, having taken only the most basic of courses during my college studies. But those observations pointed to indici of this type of behavioral issue that may have taken place in the Ramsey household, and they appeared to have been taking place over some period of time. Incidents like these would most likely not have become known to those outside of the family, but could have been underlying reasons for the grandparents' purchasing of the childhood behavioral books discussed previously. I eventually conducted a brief telephone interview with Dr. Araji in the late winter of 2007. I did not divulge the details of the investigation I was working on, but wanted to know what more she could tell me about the treatment of children diagnosed with the symptoms of SBP. Dr. Araji advised that treatment for younger patients exhibiting signs of this behavior disorder could be successfully concluded in as little as 3 to 4 months. Sessions frequently involved other family members, and appropriate role-playing exercises were part of the treatment curriculum. I inquired whether treatment for SBP would last a year or more. Dr. Araji indicated that it was possible, but that treatment going on for an extended period of time might be due to involvement of some other type of behavioral disorder problem. She advised that SBP symptoms could be intermixed with other child behavioral disorders, thus requiring greater lengths of treatment. Once again, I came away with more questions than what had been answered. Though some described Burke Ramsey as being a little withdrawn, the reports that I had reviewed about his conduct at work and school appeared to be representative of a normal child in his age range. But these records didn't correspond to the impressions Dr. Bernard had informed me during her interview with him, and I couldn't help but wonder what had been going on behind closed doors at the Ramseys' home. It wasn't clear from his parents' interviews exactly how long Burke had been seeing a psychiatrist, but it would seem safe to assume that some type of treatment and psychological testing had been taking place after JonBenet's death. Otherwise, neither of his parents would have made reference to his counseling sessions during their interviews. I contemplated the demeanor that had been exhibited in the transcript of the first interview conducted by Burke by Detective Patterson, and the affect that had been described by Dr. Bernard during the interviews she had completed with him a couple weeks later. My review of this videotape of that particular interview raised concerns, and I wondered whether the comorbidity of an attachment disorder should be considered in the grand scheme of things. It was something that Dr. Bernard had expressed concerns about, and it had been an underlying reason for her thoughts that follow-up interviews should be conducted to further explore the matter. In my review of all the official interviews recorded with this boy, not once had he expressed concern about the welfare of his sister, nor had he ever asked investigators how their search for her killer was progressing. The stress of his mother's battle with the deadly disease could have been accounted for a fear of being abandoned, and very well could have been contributed to the emotions associated with separation anxiety. It is important to note this illness took place when Burke was at an early and impressionable age. In considering all of these circumstances, it seems plausible to me that there were a whole host of things taking place in the home environment that could have influenced the events that eventually unfolded on the evening of December 25th, 1996. As a criminal investigator who was attempting to make sense of the clues that were presenting themselves in this inquiry, the questions that arose is this. Under currently accepted behavioral science lore, was it reasonably possible for a 9-year-old who was several weeks from turning 10 years of age at the time of this murder to have committed this type of crime without having exhibited symptoms of some type of behavioral disorder to teachers and others outside of the home before and after the death of JonBenet? The observations of the family friends and Dr. Bernard notwithstanding, I explored the internet for updated studies on the topic of sexually aggressive children following my call to Dr. Araji, and observed that there were a number of more recently published articles on the disorder. The U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, authored a fairly extensive article in March 2001 that provided a comprehensive overview of research on the matter. Juveniles Who Have Sexually Offended, a review of professional literature, pointed out that sex offenses committed by juveniles continued to be a serious problem. The researchers who authored the article provided a comprehensive and annotated account of the many research projects that had been documented, the characteristics of juveniles who commit these sex offenses. The article also explored the types of offenses committed and the characteristics of the families of juvenile offenders. Discussions regarding the characteristics of offenders included offending behaviors, child maltreatment histories, social and interpersonal skills and relationship, sexual knowledge and experiences, academic and cognitive functioning, and mental health issues. Other headings of interest included types of classifications of offenders and provided an outline of behaviors related to sibling incest, girls who have committed sex offenses, young children who have committed sex offenses, juvenile with developmental disabilities and mental retardation who have committed sex offenses, and juveniles who have committed sex offenses versus other types of offenses. And lastly, of course, the article covered the results of research on the critical aspects of the assessment and treatment of child disorders. There were numerous articles and research studies that followed on the heels of Dr. Araji's comprehensive publication of some of the articles I reviewed, and this include the following. A California Social Work Education Center published an article titled Child Sexual Abuse in 2002. The National Center for Sexual Behavior of Youth published a fact sheet on the topic of sexual development and sexual behavioral problems in children ages 2 to 12 in January 2004. The Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers published a report in 2006 titled Report of the Task Force on Children with Sexual Behavior Problems, which was intended to be a guideline for professional practices with children ages 12 and under. The mission of the ATSA was to promote effective intervention and management practices for individuals who have engaged in abusive sexual behavior. The point to be made is that the internet offered an abundant amount of materials that had been documenting such research involving the emerging issue of children who were involved in problematic sexual behavior. The study seemed to confirm Dr. Araji's initial exploration of the matter and revealed that we are all born as sexual beings. Research on the sexual behavior of children ages 2 to 12 suggests that sexual responses are present from birth and that a wide range of sexual behaviors for this age range are normal and non-problematic. Further, sexual development and behavior are believed to be influenced by social, familial, and cultural factors, as well as genetics and biology. It is the sexual acting out that falls outside of the norm of human sexual development that has created the concern about child and juvenile offenders. What I found intriguing was that children exhibiting behavior associated with SBP ranged widely in their degree of severity and potential harm to other children. Furthermore, researchers had determined that there was no universal characteristic or profile that could help identify the children that were most likely to offend. And despite concerns that children who had begun offending at an early age would continue into their later years, evidence suggests that the bulk of children diagnosed with SBP were at a low risk for committing future sex offenses, especially when provided with appropriate treatment. While a larger number of children identified with symptoms of SBP were overtly exhibiting behavior that appeared developmentally inappropriate, others showed no outward signs of sexual problems. It was noted in a number of studies that sibling incest was quite prevalent, but it often went unreported and ignored. Contrary to the studies involving extrafamilial sexual abuse, research found that it was difficult for parents to report the abuse of one of their children when it had been perpetrated at the hands of another child in the household. One 1991 study referenced in the U.S. Department of Justice article indicated that the duration of sex offending was greatest for sibling offenders. Nearly 45% of sibling offenders studied in the research had been committing offenses for more than a year. Moreover, sibling offenders were more likely to vaginally or anally penetrate their victims than extrafamilial offenders. Research continued to find reports of scatological behavior that was associated with SBP diagnoses and indicated that mental health issues related to anger, depression, and anxiety were factors that offenders attempted to resolve by acting out sexually. One particular set of studies caught my attention as I struggled with the significance of the absence of the pronounced symptoms of a behavioral disorder. This body of research reported that as a group, juveniles who sexually offend typically experienced academic difficulties. One study, however, found that 32% of a sample of male juvenile sex offenders had above average academic performance. The conclusion I drew from my review of these many studies was coming to understand the dynamics underlying the causes of childhood sexual behavioral problems and were extremely complex. Many variables figured into the equation as childhood psychotherapists over the years have attempted to understand and appropriately respond to the issue of this type of sexual behavior. To me, the more pressing question to be resolved centered on the issue of whether children of Burke Ramsey's age were capable of committing acts of physical violence that included murder. Additionally, having committed such an act, could we expect to see the same type of specific pre-offense or post-offense behavior, which would alert us to the child's propensity to commit this type of crime? The FBI reported that there had been 15,848 people murdered in the United States in 1996. 723 of those had been 8 years and younger. I conducted further research into crime statistics involving juvenile offenders and learned that 257 children who were 14 years of age and younger had been arrested for murder and non-negligent manslaughter in the United States in 1996. 16 of those arrests had been for boys under the age of 10. Another 14 arrests involving boys aged 10 to 12 years old. The statistics for forcible rape were even more discouraging. 61 boys under the age of 10 had been arrested for this offense in 1996. An additional 335 boys had been arrested who were aged 10 to 12 years old. John Douglas's thoughts about the perpetrator being a single-time offender struck a chord when I reviewed the national homicide statistics. Douglas had rendered the opinion that the person who had killed JonBenet was a mission-oriented offender and would not likely kill again. Thankfully, people who commit serial murders are far and few between, but like those who perpetrate single offenses, offenders usually tend to blend in with the rest of us. They don't advertise their actions by tattooing a scarlet M on their forehead, and it frequently takes a great deal of investigative work to identify the person responsible for committing this type of crime. Additionally, given the fact that a great number of murders are never solved, it must be presumed that many perpetrators were able to successfully elude the attention of authorities and that their outward behavior did not give them away. Was it possible for a perpetrator in this particular instance to have taken the life of another and go forward without necessarily drawing the attention of authorities or that of the people with whom they interacted every day? To date, no one has been arrested or convicted for the murder of JonBenet, so I would have to say that the answer to that question is a resounding yes. It therefore must be acknowledged that there are many who walk among us of all ages, sex, and color who have murdered someone at some point in their lives, and they have thus far successfully eluded identification and capture. Whether it had been accidental or intentional, I believe that the national statistics pointed to the real possibility that a 9 or 10-year-old could have committed a crime as egregious as the murder of JonBenet. It was my belief that the possibility of Burke Ramsey's involvement in these events on December 25th and 26th warranted further exploration. In coming to understand the family dynamic, I felt it was necessary to consider Patsy Ramsey's view of the world. Striving for an image of perfection came early for her and was demonstrated through the various things she accomplished over the course of her lifetime. As a high school cheerleader, she became drawn to being the center of attention and moved on to competition of beauty pageants. She won the title of Miss West Virginia in 1977 and later competed for the Miss America crown. As a wife and a mother, she was forever concerned with putting the best foot forward and, according to family friends, was never to be seen wearing the same outfit 2 days in a row. She took particular care in grooming herself when it came into the public eye and was a perfectionist when it came to presenting the family image. Opening her home to the Boulder Holiday Parade of Homes, Patsy decorated extensively, and every room boasted a different type of Christmas tree. Everything was in its place and was intended to show the world a face of a happy and prosperous family. An understanding of Patsy's internal drive to present the perfect image of her family is illustrated in many examples. One that surfaced during my review of reports revealed that she had once hired to cut her neighbor's lawn before an event was to be held at the Ramsey home. She reportedly had not spoken to her neighbors about executing this plan of action, and I thought that helped to explain her mindset when it came to presenting her world to those outside the family. Thus, I felt it was necessary to fully understand the importance of image to Patsy, as it was key to identifying a possible motive for a cover-up of this crime. I thought it twofold. First of all, I don't think that Patsy would ever be able to live down the loss of face if it came to be known that JonBenet had either suffered an accidental or intentional death at the hands of a member of her household. It probably would have not taken long for this information to go viral in the competitive world of child beauty pageants. The prospect of this outcome would have been unbearable. Secondly, I believe Patsy would have given voice to a more specific motive during Burke Ramsey's DSS interview. Having lost her beloved daughter, she would have nothing left to live for if her last remaining child were taken from her. Was she determined not to let that happen and to set up the elaborate cover-up to ensure that authorities would be misdirected? When I took into consideration all of this information, I had to pose the following questions. What does it matter whether or not Burke Ramsey was awake at the time that Patsy Ramsey had made the 911 call to police, and why would his parents wish to conceal this information? Furthermore, what parent would not ask their son, who slept just feet from the bedroom of their kidnapped and murdered daughter, if he had seen or heard anything during the night? This course of action defies human nature and has long been a red flag for me. And why would the Ramseys refuse to allow homicide investigators the opportunity to interview Burke Ramsey about the death of his sister? Instead, they insisted that this interview be performed by a psychologist/psychiatrist. Why were Burke Ramsey's parents so adamant that he was not a witness in this investigation? Was it because the family was afraid that direct contact with experienced police investigators might reveal some way in which he was involved in the case? It was readily apparent that my request of the DA's office for an objective review of my hypothesis was being ignored. I was stepping out of my comfort zone, but I made the decision to take my case to Governor Bill Owens. I was aware that the governor's office had been asked to intervene during Alex Hunter's reign, and I thought it might be time for him to consider doing so again. I spoke with Governor Owens on several occasions, and he was very interested in my endeavor and supportive of my cause. Having failed to receive any type of response from the Boulder District Attorney's Office, I crafted the following letter for his consideration. January 1st, 2007, Governor Bill Owens, 136 State Capitol Building, Denver, Colorado, 80203-1792. Responding to JonBenét Ramsey death investigation. Dear Governor Owens, as you are aware, I wrote a letter to Boulder County District Attorney Mary Lacy at the end of October 2006 requesting that I be granted the opportunity to present this information regarding an alternative case theory to the former special prosecutors who conducted the 1998-1999 grand jury investigation into the death of JonBenét Ramsey. As indicated in that correspondence, I believe that there are specific records and testimony that were not sought or considered during that first inquiry into the matter of JonBenét's death. Nearly 2 months have passed since making this formal request, and as of this writing, I have received no response from Boulder District Attorney's Office. I suppose this is not surprising in that I am aware that Mary Lacy believes an intruder was responsible for the death of JonBenét. My concern, highlighted by the events surrounding the arrest of John Mark Carr, is that the District Attorney's Office will go to extreme lengths to pursue an intruder in this case, but is unwilling to consider new evidence that suggests the possibility of a family involvement and a cover-up. I am writing you because I am aware that you have the authority to involve the Colorado Attorney General's Office in a matter such as this, and that you have taken similar steps in 1998 when you asked several Denver metro area district attorneys to consult in the case. I am convinced there are grounds for taking another look at the possibility of family involvement in the death of JonBenét, and would request that the special prosecutors who were most familiar with the details of the first grand jury inquiry be asked to review the evidence that I discovered during my work on this investigation. I believe this information is key to resolving the matter. I am seeking your assistance in bringing this death investigation to a close. In as much as the Boulder District Attorney's Office has elected not to respond to my request for an independent review of this information, I will be asking that Boulder Police Department observe/participate in the presentation of this case analysis. As the law enforcement agency that retains the original jurisdiction over the investigation of the matter, I do not believe that Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner would withhold his consent to review of information that had not been previously considered by investigators. Additionally, I would like to ask that consideration be given to inviting the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to participate in the examination of this new evidence and case theory. The members of this unit certainly have the expertise to evaluate the merit of this information, and I believe that they would offer an unbiased and objective viewpoint of the overall inquiry. In closing, I believe there is no harm to be done in examining information that could possibly move the investigation towards a definitive resolution. Cold homicide cases are often solved when evidence is considered in the light of new theories. Moreover, if the family had a part in the death of JonBenet, I believe I know where the answers are to be found and will finally solve this decade-old mystery. Thank you again for your consideration of this matter, and I look forward to hearing from you in the near future. Please do not hesitate to contact me should you have any questions or require further information. Sincerely, James Kohler. Governor Owens was interested in seeing this case move forward and placed a telephone call to the DA's office to inquire about the lack of response to my October letter. I am not conversant with the details of the discussion that took place, but Tom Bennett would call me sometime later to see about arranging a meeting to go over the materials. I asked him who would be invited to participate, and he indicated that it would most likely be himself, Mary Lacy, and members of her command staff. No outside prosecutors, Boulder Police Department representatives, or members of the BAU would be joining in this presentation. It seemed ironic. The Ramsey family took every opportunity to publicly criticize the Boulder Police Department for not seeking outside assistance, even though that was not the case. Now it was the DA's office that was unwilling to seek the assistance and opinions of outside experts on the matter. It seemed doubtful, however, that the Ramseys would have objected to Lacy's position in this instance. I saw no point in continuing to pursue the issue. Lacy was entirely sold on the intruder theory and continued to hang her hat on the microscopic traces of DNA. It was extremely frustrating to see this one piece of evidence dominate the entire direction of the case. Governor Owens thought he could do more if I were willing to go public and encouraged me to give it some consideration. I thought about it for a few weeks and scrubbed the idea. I didn't particularly care for wearing a bullseye on my back and decided to wait for a change in regime in Boulder. Not long thereafter, I received a letter from Lacy that more or less accused me of overstepping my authority and being too willing to pursue leads that she did not think likely to be productive. It had been her intention to scale back the investigation when I took over the case from her office, and instead I had pumped new blood into it by discounting the point of entry, eliminating the use of a stun gun, and discovering viable leads to pursue. It was readily apparent that I no longer retained any investigative authority, having left her employ, but it was to her office that I first sought permission to obtain an expert analysis of my hypothesis. I guess I could have accepted the invitation to present at the BAU, but my loyalties were still with the DA's office at the time. I subsequently drafted a response letter to her and went to some length to further explain my unresolved suspicions about SBP and the red flags that were present in the investigative files. Resolution of this case was in her hands, and I urged her not to let it slip from her grasp. No further communication took place after these exchanges, and one of my friends still employed there informed me that the word circulating around the DA's office was that I was obsessed with the case. It was discouraging at the time, but things began to brighten a little when the last development finally came to fruition. Sergeant Harry Steffens, involved in the surveillance of Jay Elowowski, described in Chapter 1, had retired from Telerood several years prior, but continued to come back to work as a reserve officer during the major music festivals. I was in the process of completing my case synopsis in late September 2006 during one of the fall festivals, and I took the occasion to show Harry a few of the video clips of the train room and the stun gun PowerPoint slides. Around a month later, he called me to tell me he wanted to send me something in the mail. I thought it might be responsible for the twin abrasions located on JonBenét's back. As promised, about a week later, a rectangular box arrived, and it contained a child's toy. It was a single piece of an O-gauge style train track with the same model of train and track depicted in the crime scene video of the basement playroom. The track had 3 pins extruding from one end. I called Harry and we spoke about the track. It has 3 pins, I said, and we only have 2 abrasions on JonBenét's back. The pins fall out all the time, he replied. Didn't you ever play with trains as a kid? It's possible the middle pin was missing when it was used on her back. Laughter. I was an HO3 man, and the pins weren't all this sturdy. I thought it was over and said that I'd take some scaled photographs on my end of the track. I emailed a set of digital photographs to Tom Trujillo a week or so later. It took a while, but Shelley Hissey, see Chapter 23, again worked her magic with the PowerPoint slides. In late February 2007, I received a CD from Boulder Police with a photo array of slides. The disc loaded into my computer and took several moments before the screen came alive. I was on the phone after my first viewing. Way to go, Harry. I think you just found the weapon used to inflict those marks on JonBenet. The pins on the outside of the rails of the piece of the O-type train track matched exactly to the twin abrasions on the back of JonBenet. This was a toy readily accessible in the home and located only a few feet from where her body had been found. Crime scene photos/videos had captured images of loose train track on the floor of Burke Ramsey's bedroom as well. Lou Smith's calculation of the close enough match between the air taser stun gun and JonBenet's injuries had effectively been marginalized. The cornerstone piece of evidence of an intruder's participation in the crime, already called into question, had essentially vaporized. One of my female officers, Christine Sandoval, volunteered to be a beta tester the following week, and I videotaped her jabbing and slightly twisting the head of the track into the soft flesh of her palm. The pins of the track left red marks when sufficient pressure was applied, and I suspected that the twisting motion of a twin outside rails could have been responsible for the appearance of the abrasion, especially when considering that the target area was the soft skin of a 6-year-old girl's back. It was my observation that the twisting motion of the pins could have created the round and slightly rectangular aspects of the abrasions, as noted by Dr. Meyer during the autopsy. I believe the discovery of this toy was a significant development in the case, and I contemplated the possibilities of its use during the commission of this offense. Ultimately, I had a good cop and an old friend to thank for unearthing this breakthrough. In June 2007, Mark Beckner and I found ourselves in attendance to the annual Colorado Chief of Police Conference being held in Fort Collins. At the end of the gathering, we spent some time discussing my attempts earlier that year to stimulate interest in opening a new grand jury inquiry into the matter of JonBenet's death. It was apparent that Beckner had not wanted to wade into the middle of that effort, and it made perfect sense. At the time, there were approximately 2 years remaining in Mary Lacy's term as the DA, and he couldn't afford to jeopardize the working relationship between their two agencies. I spelled out some of the details of the childhood behavioral disorder I had been studying and how it appeared to correspond to several observed aspects of Burke Ramsey's behavior and others that were possible, and called for further investigation. Beckner seemed interested in these details, and I told him I would try to find time to organize the information into a written document for his consideration. I would estimate that I had been working on this for well over a year, but managing my own department had demanded the better part of my extracurricular energy. Although delayed by many months, I finally forwarded a synopsis of the studies to Beckner in October 2008. It provided an assessment of the statements, physical evidence, and behavioral clues that strongly suggest family involvement in the crime under investigation. I pointed that I thought it extremely significant that the Ramseys were able to withhold certain medical records from the district attorney's office during the period of their cooperation that preceded the grand jury inquiry in 1998. At the time, Alex Hunter probably considered it a small concession to agree to a partial withholding of records that the Ramseys' attorneys were declaring to be an island of privacy required of the family. John Ramsey noted during his 1998 interview with Lou Smith that he had been taking medication that had been prescribed by Burke Ramsey's psychiatrist, Dr. Stephen Jaffe of Atlanta, Georgia. The fact that John was taking medication to help him through those difficult times didn't seem out of the ordinary to me. I did think it unusual, however, that Burke, who reportedly had not witnessed any of the events surrounding John Bonet's kidnapping or death, was still being treated professionally nearly a year and a half after the event. Patsy had also made reference to Burke's treatment during her 1998 interview with authorities, indicating that they didn't want him to wake up one day when he was 40 and have difficulties dealing with the repercussions of all that was going on in the events surrounding the murder investigation. Purported to have witnessed nothing related to his sister's disappearance or having nothing of import for the police interviews, I could not help but wonder why Burke Ramsey would require such extensive psychological counseling. I also referenced statements made by Pam Paugh during a nationally televised interview that had taken place around the time that the grand jury had begun its inquiry in 1998. Paugh declared that during the interview that Burke Ramsey had been cleared of any involvement of his sister's death by psychological testing. Worthy of note is that she felt it necessary to spontaneously provide his psychological treatment as an offer of proof that he could not have been involved in this crime of violence. I presented the argument to Beckner that Pam Paugh's statements to this national audience about Burke Ramsey's psychological counseling and his being cleared of any involvement in the death of his sister may have voided the doctor-patient privilege. I believe that by raising the issue of his psychological testing and treatment, she made the issue of his mental health treatment a matter of public record, interest, and concern. I wondered whether or not her public statements had opened the door to accessing his psychiatric records, for I felt that they needed to be evaluated in relation to any possible knowledge he may have had about the death of John Bonet. I concluded my letter to Beckner, urging that he again consider involving the grand jury in the matter of John Bonet's death, and was hopeful for a new regime in the district attorney's office that would consider this course of action. It was this work that prompted an investigation to participate in the cold case task force that would later be assembled to consider the future course of the investigation. I was optimistic that some positive movement would finally be taking place. The Boulder police would like us to go away. They would like to just close the books on it pretend that none of it ever happened. But we are not going away. We are going to be their worst nightmare. Patsy and John Ramsey are hanging in there until the day we die. We'll be looking for the person who murdered our daughter. Patsy Ramsey, quoted during an interview with Barbara Walters, aired on ABC News, March 17, 2000. We're on part 4. Hi, Lauren. Okay, bye.